Okay, so now that we have our cart done, we need to focus on the order page. Now remember, the order page is going to take all of the user's details and store them eventually, but it's also going to take payment with Braintree. Now we're not going to look at that until a couple of parts in, just because we want to get our order form done, our validation done, and then we can focus on storing all the information, taking a payment and checking if that payment was successful. So to start with, we can link up this checkout button to our order controller. Now, of course, at the moment, we don't have an order controller, so we can go ahead and create that now. I'm just going to copy over the home controller just to save a little bit of time. So let's paste this in here and let's save this out as home controller.php, like so. Oh, sorry, it needs to be order controller. There we go. Okay, so we've got our order controller. Let's just switch over some of the details here. And of course, we can go and get rid of this method. We'll build this up in a minute. We probably going to need product at some point, so we can leave that in there. But what we want to focus on first is the index method, which will show the order form. So we're going to need to build this up as well, build all the form elements up as well. So let's pass in our request here and our response as usual. And we're also going to need views as well. So let's put in our view just here. And let's go ahead and render this out, even though we don't have a view. So render, passing in our response, and this is going to be order index.twig. So if we just head over to our views, then we'll create a order folder to store these. And then inside of here, we will create our index.twig file. Like so. So for the order index, well, actually we can hook these up to our roots first of all. That would probably make a little bit more sense. So we're going to say app get, and this is going to be /order. And then in here, we are going to use our order controller and the index method. And we can go and set the name on this to order.index. Great. So now why don't we just hook this up? So let's just say order form here, and we'll hook this up to the button that we have just over here. So remember, that is over in our cart summary, is it? No, it's over in here, just here. So let's add our path for order.index, and this should all be hooked up now. So let's refresh, click on this, and it looks like, okay, so that's fine. We made a little mistake over here. It should be view render, and there we go. So we've got our order form all set up within our controller. Now, before we forget, there's a really important part that we need to take into consideration here, and that is when the user lands on the order form, technically they can come to this not through the cart. Now remember, in the cart controller, what we did is we refreshed or synced all of the items based on the stock levels. So we need to do that again, because if they land on this page, we're not actually then syncing the items. So we need to bring our basket into here. So why don't we just inject this into our constructor, because we're going to need this quite a lot in this controller. So let's pull this in here. So basket, and we'll say this basket like so, and just set this at the top here. We'll be pulling a few more things in here as well a bit later on. So let's make sure that this is pulled in. So use cart basket, and that should be it. So now all we need to do here is call this basket refresh, and that will update everything. So it's important that we do that, obviously. The other thing we want to do is check if we have a total. So if we have a negative amount in our basket, then obviously we don't want to show this page. So we can check this by just saying if not this basket subtotal. Remember, we have that subtotal method on our basket. Then we want to return response with redirect, and we want to pull in our router just here as well. That makes sense because we're going to be using that in our other methods, just so we don't crowd up our methods here. And let's set this in here. So this router equals router, and we'll go around, duplicate this down like so. And all we want to do then is just say this router, and we want to grab the path for the home page. You can redirect anywhere. In fact, we can go back to the cart index. That would make sense. So this just means then that we can't get onto this order form if we don't have any products in our basket. We have a negative subtotal or a 0 subtotal. And of course, what we need to do here is just say use slim router. And if I refresh, we're on the order form. But if we go back to our cart and we maybe get rid of this item and we try to go over to our order form, see, we're redirected back because we don't have anything in there. So let's just add another item. Maybe let's add a few just so we can see how this all works. That will do for now. So then let's click checkout again and we'll look at the actual form design of this page. So we need to come over to our index here for our order, and we need to extend our base template. So extends templates app.twig, and of course we have our content in here, and we'll just end that block there. So this is our order form, and there we go, looking good. So we obviously need a actual form in here. So let's create a form, and the action here will be actually creating the order, but at the moment we don't have that. So let's set a method of post so we know that we have that in there. And within this form, we're going to create a row. So this row will have on a medium-sized viewport, it will have 8 on this side, and then it will have obviously 4 on the other side. That makes up 12. So on this side here will be, again, a little summary, and we'll have an actual like pay button or checkout button rather. So once we've entered our details into our Braintree drop-in UI, we will be able to go through and actually check out and pay. So for the actual form then, this is a little bit more complicated. We're going to create another row in here, and then we are going to have this split by 6. So we're going to have a load down here. So we're going to have some fields in here, and then we're going to have some fields in here. So just to give you an idea, this will be your details, and we can add this as a header. So your details, and then here it will be the address information of the user, or just the shipping information. And of course you can add more information to this if you need to gather it. So shipping address, and that now looks like the following. So we've got your details, we've got shipping address, and then of course here will be that little summary. So for the user's details then, we just need an email address and a full name, just to keep it nice and short. So we're going to have a form group here, and inside of this we are going to have a label for the email address, and we can just write email in there. And then we're going to have an input type of email, and then the name of this is going to be email, so we can pick it up on the back end, and the ID will be email as well. So now underneath this, and we can literally just copy this down, we have a name or full name. So of course, again, you can split this out into first and last name if you want. And here we'll just say name, here we'll say name, and here we'll say name as well. And obviously we need to change this to a type of text. So we now have the following. Obviously these aren't looking good at the moment. We just need to add another class into here, and that is form control. So we can grab that and put it on there, and there we go. So we've got email and full name. So for the shipping address, we need a address line 1, address line 2, city, and postal code. So we'll create the first one and we'll duplicate this down just to save a little bit of time. And I'm just going to be a little bit annoying and add an HR here. Doesn't look good, never looks good, but just to separate things out with this very basic design. So we have a form group, and this is for our address line 1. So we can just say address 1, and here we'll say address line 1. And down here we will have an input type of text. This will be address 1, and the ID will be address 1. And of course what we can now do is add in our class, which is form control, and we can duplicate this one down. So let's pull this down. So this is going to be our address line 2. So we can just select a load of these and change that. So we now have the following: address line 1 and address line 2. We have a city as well. So let's pull this down, and why don't we just select all of what we need. So this will be city, and we'll just change that there. So we now have a city. And then finally a postal code as well. So let's just pull this in, and we will call this postal code, and we'll just change this over postal code. like so. So we now have all of that information in there. Of course, like I said, feel free to change it. Down here, just under here, later we're going to have our actual payment. In this part, we're obviously just focusing on submitting this through and actually validating it. And we will speak about validation and how we're going to do that as well. So just on the side here, we want a little box, like I said, so we can go and do this now. So under here, we're going to have a well, and we're going to have something that says your order. Now under this, we'll just put an HR. And what we can actually do now is we can include the partial that we've already created. Now we want to create another partial. This is just going to be a kind of very small content summary of the cart. We're not obviously going to take our full cart view. So let's first of all include our summary. So we know that we have that just down here. So we can pull this in. So let's go and pull this one in. So we can take this from our cart index and we can place it over here, and let's just refresh, and there we go. So we've got our order summary there. That was easy. And now we want to include a kind of general contents in here as well. So what we can do is we can do this under cart as well actually. Let's create a partial here called contents.twig, and just in here we want to create a table with a class of table. And inside of here, we want to loop through each item in our basket. So we just say for item in basket.all. Down here, we end that for, like so. And then in here, we just have a tr and a td. So we're just creating rows here. And then in here, we want an item.title. And then down here, we want the quantity, like so. And that should be enough. So we've got a little mini table with everything we need in. So we can duplicate this and just say summary.twig. This will go above the, or rather contents.twig. This will be above the summary. And there we go. So we've got a little table with the quantity here. And you can, of course, update this. So the other thing we want to do is just finish off by creating the button. Obviously, this isn't going to go anywhere just at the moment because we're not actually creating the order. So let's create an anchor. Or rather a submit button, because obviously what we're doing is we're within a form now, and this makes sense. So we're going to say button type submit. You can create an input type of submit as well if you want, and in here we're going to have a class of button default, and then in here we'll just say place order. I think that makes sense. So we now have the following. Great. So now we want to click on this. We obviously don't have anything in here at the moment. We don't have a route for this. We don't have a method for this. We want to create that. And then we want to validate all of this data. So we'll be setting up our validation as well. So let's start by creating the method on our order controller. So let's go down here. A create method. So what this will do then is we need to inject a few things in here. So we can take our request response, and we don't need our view, I don't think, because we don't actually need to go anywhere, or at least render a view here. We're just going to be redirecting if there are any problems. Now, at this point, what we also want to do is say this basket refresh. The reason being is that if we're ready to check out and we've entered all of our details and then suddenly items come out of stock, we want to redirect the user back. So we refresh the basket, and then in here we check if we have anything in the basket, or at least if we have a subtotal. So we're going to say if not subtotal, so if that is 0, then we want to return response with redirect, grabbing the path from the cart from the router, so path for cart.index. And of course here you can always flash a message and just say you no longer have any items in your cart, they've been removed, or whatever else. So down here is where we want to validate. This is really important. We're going to validate all of these fields, and what we're going to do is pull in a package called respect validation. We're going to set up a very simple class to handle validation, and then we are going to test this out, and we're going to create a couple of bits of middleware as well to show error messages within our views and all that kind of good stuff. So the package we're going to be pulling down then is called respect validation. So we want to first of all actually install this, and you can read more about the different rules we have in here about how to use it, but we're just going to be pulling it in and making it play nice with Slim. So let's pull this in with Composer. So let's do a Composer require on respect validation, and we'll wait for this to download. So now that's done, let's just head over to app, because what we need to do is now focus on how our validation is going to work. So we're going to create a folder specifically for anything to do with validation, whether this is custom validation rules, whether it is different forms that we're going to create. So forms basically represent all of the validation rules for a particular form. So we'll start out just by creating inside of here a folder for our contract. So let's create a contracts folder, and of course we're going to be binding this to our container so it's easier for us to use. So let's just create this contract out really quickly, and this is going to be our validator interface. Let's go and just pull in a namespace here. So it'll be under cart validation contracts, and the interface here is validation interface. So for our validation interface then, we're going to have two methods. You can of course add more. One is going to be our validate method. That's just going to take the request. So that will be the request as in the current request we get through to it. That means that we can pick up any data from our form. And then we're going to have a fails method. So let's just define these out. So we're going to say validate. We're going to type hint that request in there because we need to make sure that that is definitely a request. And then we're going to have an array of rules. Then we want to have a fails method. You can of course create a succeed method or success method, whatever you want to do, but we're just going to implement this now. So now we want to create the concrete implementation of our validation. So validator.php. And of course, this is going to be under cart validation. And this is our validator, which implements our validator contract, or rather our validator interface, sorry. And we can pull this in up here. So use cart validation contracts validator interface. So now within here, we want to, or we have to rather, because we're now under contract to create it, create a validate method. We have our request passed in and our rules passed in. And the whole point of this is just to go through all of the rules and make sure all of the stuff that's been passed through into the form, which we get through request, actually succeeds based on the rules that we've created. So then finally down here, we'll just create our fails method and we'll implement all of this in just a moment. So of course, because we're type hinting this, we just need to pull this in. So let's just pull this one in here as well, just so we have it. And we can now bind this to our container and start to check that it works. So for now, let's just say return false, and we'll test if this actually works, and then we'll come back and fill this in. So over in our container then, we want to obviously place this in here. So we're going to pull in, first of all, our contract. So use cart validation contracts validator contract, validator interface rather. And then we also want to pull in our actual validator implementation. So then here what we can do is we can say validator interface class, again attach this to our container, and in here we just want to return a new validator. And of course we just have our container in here, current state of our container. So that's it. We've just basically just pulled this in and then returned a validator. So we can now use this wherever we need it. And of course we need this over when we actually create a method, create a order, sorry. So we need to pull this in. So we can do this just here actually. So we can say validator interface, validator. And then here we can pull this in. So validator, and just pop this up here as well. And of course, because we're using the interface there, what we do actually need to do is just pull this in. So we can go and grab it from our container. We just need to pull in our validator interface, and we can paste this up here. And there we go. So this will inject our validator. So just to test that this is working then, down here, we can just do a die and we'll do a var dump on this validator. And if we go over to our browser, we can close this off now. We can click place an order. And of course, we haven't hooked this up yet either. So let's do this now. So if we go over to our views here, over into order index, we can just hook this up. So here, this is going to be, well, rather the actual form is going to be, because we're actually submitting a form. This is going to be path 4. And then if we go over to our roots here, we'll just basically duplicate this down, set this to post, set this to create, and then we'll say order.create. So we're calling the right method, and we'll get rid of this as well. So it's order.create, and we have a correct method type. So now it looks like this cannot be injected in. So we need to figure out why this is not working. So we've got validator interface. We have this pulled in here. So cart validation contracts validator interface. And of course, we've called it validation interface. So let's just update this. It should be validator interface. And we'll just check that we've done this properly. Validator interface. And this should be okay now. And this is fine. It's just because when we actually declared this, we didn't type hint rules. So if we just go over to our validator and just make sure that we adhere to that contract. And there we go. So we now have our validator in there and we can test that this works. Remember what we did down here is just do a little dump on it. So if we press place order, you can see that we now get our actual concrete implementation of our validator back. Okay, so it's all hooked up and ready to go. What we can now do is just pretend that we are actually validating. So just under here then, we can say something like validation equals this validator validate. We can pass in our request, which will give that validator all of the information it needs. And then we pass an array of rules in, but obviously we'll update that in a moment. And then here we can say if validation fails, well, we want to redirect the user back and we'll handle all the errors in a moment. So we're going to say return response with redirect. And we're going to say this router path 4, and again we'll just go to order.index. That makes sense. And here we'll just die and say create order. So when we do get around to it, we know that that works. So now when I click place an order, the reason this isn't working is because when we do actually call our validate method, we eventually will need to return this so we can chain on the method. So when I refresh now, you can see it just says create order. Now, if we change fails to true, so this will actually pretend it's failed, when I click place order, you just see we're redirected back and then we can show the appropriate error messages. So to fill in the rest of our validator, we need to kind of work out how to use our package that we've just installed, which is respect validation. So the way that this works is we want to loop through all of our rules. So we can start just doing this now. We're just going to say for each rules as field, that's the name of the field that we post through, and this is the rule. Then in here we want to basically check each of our rules that we've provided in here assert true to basically what we've passed in. So what we would normally do in here is we'd say something like address 1, and then we would give the rule just in here. But what we're not going to be doing is that. We're going to keep this in a separate class, and we're going to do this within our validation. We're going to create a forms folder, and this is going to hold all of our validation rules for our order form. So this is just a way to kind of keep it separate from our controller so we don't have too much lying around. So this is going to be really straightforward. We just have an order form class in here. We can give this a namespace where we have to. So cart validation forms, and let's create a order form class. And in here, we're going to have a rules method, and this is going to return a list of our rules. So the way that this is going to work is over in our order controller, in here, we're going to say order form, and we're going to access the rules like that. So now that we've done this, we need to work out how respect validation rules look and work. So we need to actually pull in here the respect validation validator. So we just say use respect validation validator, and we're going to call that V. So now in here, we need to work out what we're going to validate. Well, we're going to validate the email address. We'll just leave this as an empty string. We're going to validate the name of the user. We're going to validate the address 1. We're going to validate the address 2, even though it's optional, we still need to make sure that it's correct. The city and the postal code as well. We're not going to validate the card information or anything like that because Braintree's UI handles all of that for us. We don't need to worry about that at all. So if you add any more to your user or your shipping address, or you add anything else, you can just come over here, define a rule, and everything will automatically work. So for the email, this is how we define respect validation rules. We just say v email, simple as that, really nice, easy library to use. And for the name, we want this to be alpha, and we want to allow spaces. So any letters with spaces included. So for the address, we're going to have an alphanumeric with spaces. So this can be numbers and letters and spaces, and also dashes as well. And then for the address 2, this is going to be optional. But if we do provide data, we want this to be alphanumeric with a space or a dash. So if you're a little bit, confused about these rules, you can just go ahead and look them up on that GitHub page. For the city, we want this to be alphanumeric with a space. And for the postal codes, of course, this varies, but I'm just going to say alphanumeric with a space. But of course, you can change these rules over to whatever you want. So now that we have our order form and we're calling our validate method, all we need to do here is test if each of these rules that we've passed in here, which is that order form, actually work against the data that we've been given. And remember, we have our slim request in there that will allow us to grab that. So we do a try catch on this. If this fails, respect validation will throw an exception. Now for each of the rules that we've defined, we want to set a name for this. So basically this will just be the name of the item. So we just do a UC first, which is uppercase first letter on field, and then we assert that rule based on the data that we've been given. So we use request to get the param, and that is the field. So essentially all that's happening here is we're passing in our request data, so our form data, we're passing in our rules, and we're just checking if that data works with that rule. That's pretty much all we're doing. Now here what we do is we catch a nested validation exception, and then if that's the case, we want to append to some kind of errors array. So here we're just going to say errors like so, and then in here we can say this errors, and then we want to categorize them under each field. Get messages. So what this will do is from the respect validation library, it will give us a list of messages. Of course, what we can have is if something's required, we'll just get one message. But if there are multiple error messages, then we'll obviously get them as well. So now what we can do is pull in this nested validation exception. So we just grab this from the respect validation library. We just import this at the top. So it's validation, exceptions, and it's nested validation exception. There we go. So how do we determine if something's failed? Well, we determine if it's failed if the errors array is not empty. That means that there must have been some errors put in there at some point when a validation exception was thrown. So with this done, we can just start to test this out. Now the way that we're going to test this out is if we just change this to public, what we can do is down here, if it fails, we can just kill the page, and we can do a var dump on validation errors. We'll change that back to protected in a minute. So now when I go and place an order, of course, our order form needs to be pulled in. So let's just do that now. So use cart validation forms order form. And when we refresh, we now see the following. Of course, what I didn't do is make the order form rules method a static method, which is really important because we're calling it statically. So there we go. We now arrive at the point where we're seeing our error messages. So name must only contain letters, all these kind of stuff. So city must only contain letters, email must be a valid email. So all of these things. And of course you can change these around. So let's just close off our order form. We don't need that anymore. Let's go over to our validator and set this back to protected. And let's go over to our order controller and just get rid of this. And now what we can do is think about, well, how are we going to output these to our form? Well, we're going to create some middleware that's going to pass through all of our errors into our session. So just to do this very roughly down here, we're going to say session errors, this errors. So after something is validated, after we validate, we're going to set the errors that we have up here, whether that's empty or not, into our session. And that means that we can use them on the form to actually output whether a particular field has a problem. And we're going to be using middleware to do this. So why don't we just close all of this off and just start to create this middleware now. I know this is does seem like a lot of setup, but essentially what you're doing here is just setting something up that you'll only have to set up once. You can use this again and again. This will make validation when you get down to lots of different forms. If you want to validate lots of different forms, this will make things really easy into the future, trust me. So inside of middleware then, we want our validation middleware. So let's create a new file in here. Let's call this validation errors middleware actually, like so. And essentially what this will do is if we just set this up, so it will be under cart middleware. If you're not familiar with the concept of middleware within Slim or any framework, essentially what's happening is that these pieces of middleware are being called before we get to the core of our application. And that means that we can kind of set things up and do things that we need to do before the user gets to the page that they have requested. So what we need to do here then is just say validation errors middleware. Now within Slim, what we have is an invoke method, a magic method. And then into this, we have a request, a response, and the next callable middleware, because we can obviously have multiple pieces of middleware that get called in order. So over here, what we can do is say protected view, because we need to basically within this middleware pass any errors that we have into the next session or the next view. So we're going to say construct, and when we add the middleware, we'll need to pull in twig as a dependency. So we can just set this up here. So this view equals view. And now inside of here, we can basically just set everything up. So what we do is we say response next, and we pass through the current state of the response, or rather the current state of the request and the current state of the response. And then we return that response. And then here what we want to do is actually take all the errors from our session and place them into a global twig variable. So let's just add this middleware to our application just to make sure we didn't break anything. First of all, this makes sense. So we need to come over to Bootstrap app, and just at the bottom here, what we can do is say app add, and we can choose this middleware. So we can say cart middleware validation errors middleware, and inside of here we need to pass in that dependency that I mentioned a minute ago. So what we need to do is grab our container first of all, because we need to pull this out of the container. To do this, we just say app get container, works the same as if you're using a normal Slim setup. And then down here we actually need to get that item. So to do this, we just say container get twig class, and of course because we're using that, we just need to say up here use Slim views twig. So now we have our middleware registered. We're passing through twig as a dependency to our middleware, which we can use to update our views. So let's refresh and go back to our order page, and we have a little problem here. So let's just have a look. Looks like we spelt middleware wrong there. You probably noticed that. Oh, and of course we need to create a new instance of that. That makes total sense. So it says it can't be found. So let's just double check this cart middleware validation errors middleware. Let's go over to this cart middleware validation errors middleware. We spelled this one wrong, or I spelled this one wrong again. So this should be fine now. And the only thing that we didn't do here, which is absolutely fine, is just up here say use slim views twig, like so. So now what's going to happen is when we click place order, we're redirected back. We need to set this into twig as a kind of global. So this is pretty straightforward. We just want to first of all check if that errors is set, because obviously it might not be. So we just say session errors. Now if that is set, we just say this view get environment, and we've seen this before when we were passing things through. So get environment, add global. Remember we did this with our basket, errors, and then we want to pass them errors that we've stored in our session from our validator. And then what we want to do is unset them errors, because we no longer need them. We only need them one per session. So now what's going to happen is when we place order, we now have the errors in our form because we've added them as a global within Twig. So we can use them under each thing to check if there's an error and then go ahead and output them. So let's go and do this. And then after that, we'll move on to one more piece of middleware. So we are very nearly done. So over in order index then, under email, let's just try this out here. Now we have something called has error. We just have a class called has error. That will give us a little red border. And what we also have down here, we have this, a help block, and we would usually create this as a span. And we have an email error in here, for example, and that gives us the following. So now that we know the kind of markup structure, we can only add has error if we have an error. Just to give you an example of this, and if you want to test this out, you want to say errors, and then we can just say something like JSON encode. Now what's going to happen is when I refresh, we see null. When I click place order, you can now see we've got an object with lots of different properties in. So we've got email, name. So this is how we pick it up, and this is what that middleware we've created was doing. Okay, so we can do this by in here, just creating an if statement. So we're going to say if errors.email, then we know that there's an error. So we're going to end our if there. And in here, we're going to say has error. So we can test this out by clicking place order. That goes red. Perfect. And we can do the same thing for our help block as well. So here we would say if errors.email, then we want to output this help block showing the actual error messages or the error message. So we're going to grab only the first error because that's usually appropriate. So we're going to say errors.email, and then we're going to use the first filter just there. So now we see the following. So although that was a lot of setup, you can see now that when you create a new form anywhere, you just do this, redirect back, and literally just it will work. It will just output everything you need. Of course, you'll need to do a little bit of work here, but you get the general idea. So we can do this for the rest of our fields. So let's do this for the full name. And remember, this is called name, and that's it. And then we can do the same thing here with the help block. So let's pull this down, and this is errors.name, like so, and that should be about it. So when I click this, you can see that we get an error message as well. If you want to customize these error messages, you can go over to Respect Validation, over to the wiki on GitHub, and you'll find more information about how to do everything you need to do there. So let's just quickly do this for the addresses, and then we'll talk about another problem that we're going to have, and that's fairly easy to solve. So this is address 1, and we'll do all these first, and then we'll do the rest. So this is address 2, this is city, this is postal code. So it's just postal_code, and that's it, luckily. So let's go over here and pull this down. So again, this is address 1, and down here we have address 2, and just the same for all of this, like so. And this will be postal code, and we'll just check that all this works. So let's just update postal code here. Let's just update these like so. Address 2 and address 1, and I think this should be good. So let's click place order, and you can see that apart from address 2, because remember that's an optional field, if we do fill it in and it's got a load of rubbish in there, then we will of course see that as well. And like I said, you can customize these error messages as well. So that is our validation done. Of course, feel free to modify it. You know, it makes sense to do that. The only problem I have now is if I were to go and enter an email address, oh, and I'm also going to turn autocomplete off here as well, because that's going to get a little bit annoying. So if I enter an email address like so, and I fill everything out except say, you know, one thing, and there's some kind of validation error, you can see that that goes. So we don't have an error here anymore, but we have lost that data, which is really bad for the user experience. So what we want to do is create another piece of middleware that will handle this. This is pretty straightforward. I'm going to copy this middleware because it's going to be pretty similar, and I'm going to call this old input middleware. Paste this in. We'll go and change the name of this, so old input middleware. And inside of here we have a similar deal. So we're taking in Twig as a dependency, but what we're doing here instead is we are checking for something called old in the session. Now what we're doing outside of this before we fill this in is for every request we are setting inside of this session the request, and we're going to use the get params method on the request. This will just grab all of the data that we pass through to a form. So now what this is going to do is set this data, and then if it is set here, the next time around we run, we want to attach it over. So we can do this by just grabbing this line here, over to here, and all we want to do is say old, and then it's session old. So essentially all this means is that we'll have access on all of our Twig templates an old value, because we're adding this as a global, and that will just be the previous request data. So that's all that we're doing here. And of course what we want to do is go ahead and add this as middleware. So let's just say here old input middleware, and we can now test this out. So we obviously need to update our form a little bit because this isn't going to work otherwise. And all I usually do, there's nothing wrong with doing this, is just saying value and then saying old.email. That's all we need to do now. So once again, we did a little bit of work to set up the middleware, but now this makes total sense. So now when I enter an email address and then I click place order, you can see that that stays in there because it's taking the data from the request before. Of course, you know, we can do this for all the others as well, and it's pretty straightforward. So let's grab this then and do this for the full name as well. So let's just paste this in here. So it's just old.name. And then down here we have the shipping address. So that's just address 1. We have address 2. And the same for the city and the postal code. So we'll quickly do these and then we are done. So the postal code there, like so. And just to test this out, we can fill out this information. Enter, let's say we'll leave the full name. And let's just add this in. Click place order, and there we go. So this one has a problem, but all of this information stayed. Let's get rid of the email because we know that works, and let's add in a full name here. And there we go. So this works, but now this is empty. So we know that this works. And then of course, when we do fill everything in correctly, we get to the point where we can actually start to create an order. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing in the next part. So we're going to be inserting everything into the database. We're going to be hooking up some more models, creating relationships, and generally just getting all of the data into the database before we start processing payments with Braintree. I want to give a huge shout out to our friends at Braintree for supporting Codecourse. Mobile app development can be complex, but integrating your payments no longer has to be. With Braintree, your business can accept nearly any type of payment on any device with one simple integration. Everything from PayPal to Android Pay or whatever comes next. Braintree's simple, flexible SDKs make your job and payments easier, and you can learn more at braintreepayments.com/Codecourse.